Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland.
And I'm Dallas Jones.
This week on Red, White, and Blue, we're going to talk about the trouble with Congress, and we have two distinguished guests, both former congressmen, but also both former state senators. First, Jim Turner from the 2nd Congressional District, second, Craig Washington, an old friend of the show from the 18th Congressional District, and a long-term guest. I mean, he's been on the show for first appearance was 16 years ago.
Wow.
How do you like that? You were probably in diapers at that point.
I'm not sure I was born.
Okay, let's roll. First question.
Really, I was probably like 15.
Yeah, there you go.
But
you watch the show then, didn't you?
I don't think I did, Gary, but thank you for letting me have the first question.
My pleasure.
First question. How has Congress changed since you all were there? Or has it?
Jim?
Well, it's certainly gotten more partisan since I was there. When I arrived in Congress, Newt Gingrich had just been Speaker for one term. And I think with his election, a lot changed in terms of the nature of the Congress and the way people related to one another. So I think as the years have progressed since then, it's only gotten more partisan. And that's probably because of the redistricting that's occurred, which I was a victim of. But it caused the parties to move far to the right or far to the left. And I was a blue dog Democrat. I was a more moderate Democrat. And at that time when I came to Congress, we had 50 blue dog members. Today they're down to about 20 or so. So I think the character of the people that are coming to Congress creates a more adversarial relationship, and it's, in my judgment, not good for the country.
Would it be fair to say, Craig, that the reason we're not getting things done is because of the type of personalities we're now electing by both parties?
I think that's true. I think they're, as Jim said, they're going in opposite directions, and sometimes they seem to forget that the purpose for being there is to solve problems for us and not for themselves.
Yeah, if you're an observer as you are now, as citizens, you'd have to say they're not getting a lot done in Washington in terms of dealing with the people's business.
Right.
Doing a really good job of fighting each other, but not advancing anything. So I would ask, and we're interested, since you also were both former Texas state senators, how would you contrast how the Texas State Senate operated then and still operates, with your experience with Congress?
Well, the state Senate, of course, is getting more partisan today as well.
Yeah.
When I was there, and I'm sure when Craig was there, who was there before me, it didn't really matter if you were a Democrat or Republican. People got along. They worked for what's best for Texas. Bob Bullock was lieutenant governor, and his theme was, let's do what's best for Texas. And I think that's not what's happening there today. So the same virus that's infected Washington seemed to have found its way to Texas. And again, I think a lot of it's a result of the redistricting that creates strong Republican districts and strong Democratic districts. And people don't have to worry about a general election. They're already assured a victory in the general election based on the party they're in. So they fight it out in the primary. So you end up with people coming to the Senate in Texas and to Congress in Washington that really don't have to worry too much about getting along with one another to get reelected.
But is that it? So the redistricting, right? I understand that piece, but this extreme partisanship is spreading like wildfire, not only in the Texas Senate, but in places all around the country. I guess my question would be, is that the only factor? Because I would present another possible factor as to why it's getting worse and worse. But just curious, is that the only factor, the redistricting piece?
Oh, I don't think that's the whole thing. I think there are a multitude of factors, and I think that Congress changing has kind of flowed down to state legislatures. I don't know what it was like in any other state legislature, but like Jim said, when we were serving in the legislature, both in the House and the Senate, a lot of times you didn't even know or care what party a person belonged to. It was more on the merits of the issue. And we would debate, but then we were never off in corners where we didn't speak to each other. When I got to Congress, I was walking the sidewalk one day on my way to go and vote. My office in the Longworth building, I was walking with an older member. You try to make friends with people that are older, kind of eat cheese a little bit and everything, you know. And I just spoke to another member going in the opposite direction who'd gone to vote. We took about 6 steps, and he says, "Don't you ever speak to him again when you're with me." And I said to myself, I'm in the wrong place. This is not what I signed on for. I thought the state legislature was kind of like a AAA ball club, and you look up to the Congress as being the big league. Nothing could be farther from the truth. They spend 90% of their time getting reelected and 10% of their time solving problems.
I have 2 quick follow-ups, real quick.
Go ahead.
And the first one is a yes or no, and I'm asking this because, like you said, we had Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia here a couple of weeks ago, and I have a question for you. When you were in Congress, either of you, have you ever gone into the Republican cloakroom?
I never went into the Republican cloakroom, but that wasn't any. I presume maybe that it was verboten, but I mean, I had a lot of Republican friends and colleagues, and there was no impediment to me going in. There was nothing that said I couldn't go in, but it just never occurred to me.
And I only ask that question because for our regular viewers, you know, last week, or when we had her here, she said, "Hey, look, we don't even go into each other's cloakrooms," and kind of like it still was the same then. So that's more of a lighthearted question. Yeah. My real question I want to go back to is when you talk about how things changed and how the partisanship changed. My question would be, when did it happen?
I think it's been gradual. I mean, the election of Newt Gingrich changed the atmosphere. You know, Bob Michael was the leading Republican prior to Newt Gingrich revolution. He was a gentleman. He got along well with whoever happened to be the speaker. He was always the ranking Republican because most of those years, obviously, Democrats were in the majority. But, you know, I think and you're exactly right, Dallas, when you talk about why do we have this division in the Congress and now in the legislature, it's not just redistricting. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the inability of members to be able to get to know one another, which is harder to do, particularly in the Congress today than it was back years ago. And I think also there's a sense that, particularly today, that you've got to have leadership at the top that wants to bring people together. You know, if you take what's happening in Washington today, when President Trump took over, he really exhibited very little interest in working with people in the other party. And that's unique. If you go back to previous presidents, and I was in Washington when both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush were in the White House. Both of them were people of character. Both of them were people who believed that you needed to unite people rather than try to divide people. And so in this era we're in now, where you have leadership that's promoting division in the country, that influence is spread out to the members of Congress that convene there weekly to do business. So I think that's one thing that needs to change. And anybody who's president of the United States, you can fight it out in the election, but once you're elected, your duty is to bring this country together and to unite people and to seek common purpose and common cause. Yeah. And that's not happening today, and it makes a difference.
Finally, that's what I was waiting for someone to say.
My observation is that Trump is just the latest manifestation of this problem, and under him and the way Congress is, it's the worst that it's ever been. Because you go back, second term Newt Gingrich Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton was, I think, the model term where they actually ended up working together. And for whatever reason, I actually think Newt and President Clinton really must have liked each other or respected each other, because they worked together and there was a lot of compromising going on, and there was a lot of legislation passed. You go forward, Bush gets elected. And Governor Bush in Texas worked in a bipartisan way, and the way you all talked, the way the legislature used to be. And he gets to Washington, and admittedly, the election was controversial. It was very close, Florida, hanging chads, etc. The Democrats were really irritated that they didn't win and think that they got cheated. So Bush comes to Washington and basically gets stoned by the Democrats on the front end. He really does. So he doesn't really get as much done as he'd like. And then we roll forward and we get Obama. And Obama comes in. And Obama, according to our friends in Washington, he never had much use for Congress anyway. He wanted to be able to do his own thing, and I have a lot of respect for President Obama. However, if you remember, when he got into office, he has this first meeting with Republican leadership, and he met with one of my friends was the whip before he got beat in a primary by a really strong conservative in Virginia. Just to tell you how that state's changed. And the comment Obama made basically was, "I won, you lost. So, it's going to be my agenda." And the response, if you remember, from the Republicans was, "We're going to make our goal the next 4 years to beat you." So that's how we go from let's legislate for a while to let's just go to war and never stop. So that happened, and of course, naturally, I would think, because it's a back to you kind of thing in Washington. So when Trump wins, of course the Democrats are going to feel that way, and they also feel that Hillary should have won, and they can't believe that Trump won. There's a lot of Republicans didn't believe that Trump won, the primaries. So you end up with that, so Trump comes in, and of course, we talked about Trump before. Trump is a New York real estate guy with sharp elbows. That's who he is. It's not going to change. So we end up with that same problem. But after that soliloquy, I wanted to say, I think part of it is who the people elect. So if we elect more Jim Turners and Craig Washingtons to send to Congress, send to the White House, send to the U.S. Senate, I think things would change. People with similar personalities to y'all's, interested in getting things done, right? And understanding compromise is not a dirty word, and that you can actually work with the other side and should not be tarnished. But then you get to redistricting. Redistricting has become, what do we have? How many competitive races do we really have in Texas congressionally? A handful.
Probably two, maybe three.
Right, and the same thing in the state Senate. And in a lot of races in the state house, people just throw their hat in, they're going to get reelected. So if we change the system and have it really competitive districts, then when the country or the state's mood changes, the legislature changes. So people could understand you don't have to go to the far right to be successful. You don't have to go to the far left to be successful, because the truth is most of the country's in the middle.
If we can get a word here, Gary.
Yes.
That's part of it, but reflect on the fact that redistricting also implicates the Texas House and the Texas Senate, and you don't have it that way. I mean, we fight hard over the district lines, but once they're done and we have an election, we don't carry on like they carry on in Washington until the next redistricting. The next decennial census is 10 years away. They don't get anything done. They don't even talk to each other. And they become perpetual election machines. So the most important thing to them, in my view, is getting elected. Not serving, but getting elected.
Well, that's who we're attracting these days?
Take a look at them. Rather than decide what's fair or right, you decide how will it poll. How will it poll and have a darn thing to do with serving? If something's right, you should vote for it, knowing that you'll lose your next election because it's good for the country. And our country's in a bad place right now.
I said we need more people to serve that have that attitude.
But I will say in your monologue here, I think there's a key piece, and I'm going to put this out there.
Good.
It's okay to talk about Donald Trump, and it started, and Donald Trump has made it more divisive. But I would argue that Donald Trump was created from something else, and I think the divisiveness didn't start there, rather with the election of Barack Obama.
He made it a whole lot different, though.
No, I get it. Let me make my point here. Okay. Let me make my point. And from the election of Barack Obama, we saw the creation of the Tea Party, and the Tea Party made it difficult for particularly folks in the Republican Party that would be sensible legislators that would agree, that gave them a fear for their primaries, and so now they all run to the right to feed that part of their base. I think that's an important part, and that is the very base of Donald Trump.
Well,
and so I think that made everybody more polarized. That played a part.
I don't think you can step away, with respect, I don't think you can step away from the fact that he has not a clue about civics.
I'm not. I agree.
So, I mean, you can take a person who has a different point of view, but if he has an appreciation for the legislative process, I mean, first of all, we live in a country where people believe that you can do something on day one. The only thing you do on day one is raise your hand and get sworn, and the people who believe that get angry when you don't do it on day one, and that's their fault because they teach civics in the 7th grade, and they don't know House, Senate, how a bill becomes law. You learn that in elementary, junior high school.
Oh yeah, schoolhouse rock.
You'd be surprised how many people have no idea what that means, and so they listen to someone who makes all these promises, and we let them get away with making these promises. We let them get away. Donald Trump and all of them get away with these promises. But respectfully, Dallas, I think the difference is he doesn't have a clue. If you had someone like him who understood the legislative process, regardless of him being right, left, and all of that stuff, he'd still be cool to work with. But if you don't have if you're a hockey player and they put you in the middle of a football game, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong stuff.
Well,
that's my view.
I think Dallas is onto something when he talks about the origin of Trump and how it rose out of the Tea Party. And, I think we've got to respect the fact that, the people that were involved in the Tea Party, they were far right, but they also were people who had decided that Washington wasn't working and that they needed to shake things up. And I think Trump's election was motivated by a lot of people who kind of had lost faith in the ability of Congress to work and thought the government was doing things that weren't for the people. And I think they elected Trump because they wanted a disruptor. And that's the danger that we face right now. We can't blame all of what's going on in our country on just the people that are elected. We got to look back and say, what's motivating the people that are electing them? And I think people really want their government to solve the big problems that are being overlooked today. They want them to deal with the $20 trillion national debt that's going to consume close to 20% of our annual budget in just a few years. They want people to deal with health care. They want people to have a government that's honest and fair and provides equal opportunity to all. They really do want that. But what they're frustrated about is the inability of the Congress to do that. And I think Craig's right. I think people have kind of forgotten how fragile democracy is and how it requires everybody to participate. And it's at its root, it requires people to understand that we've got to have some common agreement on what the facts are. Well, and these false narratives, and I guess it's been fed a lot by the internet, but these false conspiracy theories we hear today, all this stuff that you read, those things are destructive of the ability of the country to come together and unite around the truth. And so, at the heart of it, I think what we've got a problem with right now in our country is just a commitment to basic character. And people have got to understand there is a truth and there are lies. There is right and there is wrong. And what they ought to be looking for is the people to elect who will commit to those kind of basic values. De Tocqueville said years ago when he visited America from France, he said, America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. And I think that's where we are today in this country. And it's disappointing to see those trends.
The crossroads.
But we need to come back to some basic values and some basic character. That makes this country great.
Excuse me. My question would be then, how do we attract the kind of people you're talking about? I mean, people, quite frankly, like you two gentlemen, to run and get elected. It's almost like the people know what they want, but they don't vote for what they really want. They vote for the really partisan people in their primary, the most partisan, as opposed to having people run and say, look, I'm a Republican, but I'm going to run for Congress, but when I go to Washington, I'm going to get something done. I'm not going up there to say no.
Don't
we
be
have
afraid to
issues.
say compromise. I bet you if you polled them out, I bet you 1 in 10 would be willing, courageous enough to use the word compromise. Compromise is somewhere between you and I. I mean, you're not going to be right all the time. I'm not going to be right all the time. Somewhere in the middle is something we can both live with. A long time ago, you said say it was like kissing your sister. It's not the kind of kiss you want, but it's still a kiss. No, we're in corners. Money's involved. If money weren't so important in getting elected, then the people who really make out are the posters and the consultants and people like that, because they can see farther than the candidate. But we allow symbolism. So you got a red, white, and blue sign that symbolizes that you're a patriot. You sit there with a dog on your lap, and that symbolizes that you're compassionate, whether you are or not, or whether you have children or not, or those kind of things. So we have allowed symbolism to take the place of a conversation. Who knows just for instance, there's people running for city council. What are they going to do? They have beautiful signs and stuff like that. I dare say I have not heard, I did vote in the election. I don't know much about what they stand for. We used to talk about platforms and what you're going to do when you get elected and what programs you're for and things like that, but not much anymore.
So we're running out of time, and I definitely want to touch on this subject. And I certainly want to say, Congressman, all consultants aren't bad. All consultants aren't bad. They got some good ones. They got some good exception. Just joking.
You get a bill for that.
Right. Impeachment. This is the big talk of what's happening in Congress right now.
Well, nothing else is
nothing
happening.
else. Like, we're not talking about anything else.
No, that's true.
Right? It's too hot for TV. If you were there right now, what are your thoughts?
Well, I can tell you mine. I was there when Clinton was impeached by the Republican majority in the House. And, when Clinton went through it, it was about a personal moral failure. It did not affect the country or the powers of the presidency. It was clearly wrong. But I studied the history of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, tried to determine what impeachment meant, and I determined that it did not talk about personal moral failures of the nature that Clinton was guilty of. Therefore, I did not vote to impeach Clinton. The Republicans were in the majority, and of course he was impeached. Here we've got a different case. We're talking about actions of a president that leveraged the taxpayer funding for Ukraine's defense to try to pressure the Ukrainian president into announcing a public investigation of the president's chief political opponent. That action compromised our national security, certainly compromised Ukraine's security. It is exactly the kind of thing that the Founding Fathers were talking about when they included the provision in the Constitution regarding impeachment. And it was a big worry back then that foreigners might try to influence our election and some Tory might get elected president of the United States and do things that are in England's interest or France's interest. It was a big concern. So I don't think there's any question after all the hearings are concluded that the president's involvement in this issue is going to be very clear to the American people. And so the only question, really, is whether it results in an impeachment and trial in the Senate where he's removed from office, or whether Republicans come to the conclusion that, well, yes, it may have been wrong, but I don't think it rises to impeachment, and therefore we ought to just kick this down the road and let the American people decide in the next election.
What's your take, Craig?
The saddest thing for me is the fact that
1 minute.
the conversation leans, Dallas, toward, without going into all the facts, that we're willing to accept this as normal. They say they do it all the time. That is the worst indictment on people who give and serve in public office. And you know it, you consult. We're better than that. it doesn't matter. I don't get into the merits of I watch like Jim does on television, but I'm sad that we as a people allow ourselves to say, get over it. That makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck, and as you can see, I don't have much hair.
Well, hey, come on. And we also
Get
know,
over it.
Yes, I understand, but we also know Biden bragged about threatening the Ukrainians about dropping
That doesn't
the
make that right.
prosecution.
But see, here
I
we
agree
go
with
with
you.
the
No, but
Me
I agree with
Tooism.
you. No, but I agree with you.
Right. Stop
And
them
what
both.
Yeah.
Neither
it's
one of
not-
them ought to be serving.
That may be a compelling argument that they shouldn't be doing that, but I think if we peeled back the onion, we would find this is happening a whole lot more than it should. But this goes back to what you all talked about, the type of people that we need to put into office. People
But then the
with character.
voters become cynical if we say it's okay. Then the voters become cynical and they don't expect any more from us. So they think we're electing a bunch of crooks. So why go and vote?
Correct.
There you go. Well,
That's the last word.
that is the last word. You want to close the show?
So, you're being so kind today. Thank you all for joining us for this week's episode of Red, White, and Blue. I'm Dallas Jones.
I'm Gary Polland. We'll be back next week.